Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we begin Perek Chamishi, the fifth Perek in the Hilchos Machos Assuros, the laws of forbidden foods in the Rambam Sefer Kedusha, and we continue on the theme regarding what one could eat, what cannot eat, and we were talking about in the kosher species. Now we're discussing regarding what's called Eber min Chai, the limb from a living creature, and how that relates to the uber, to the fetus that's inside the womb. So again, Halacha Aleph regarding the Isra Eber min Chai. Says the Rambam, Pi Shmuel Lamdu. From tradition it was learned, Shazesh, and then but this that says in the Dvarim, don't eat the soul with the flesh. What does that mean? Lesser aver, that's coming to forbid the limb, that was cut off from a living creature, because a living limb is called nefesh, where you cut it, it's not going to regenerate, it's not going to come back, like a soul that's taken away, which doesn't come back. So that's what the pasuk means, nefesh, don't eat the soul when it's with the flesh, meaning when it's still living with the flesh. Now, regarding a limb from a living creature, this was from the Shev Mitzvah. This was told to Noach in Bereshis, but a piece of meat with its soul, damai, its blood, should not be eaten. And the Isra Min Chai Noig, and this applies the prohibition of a limb from a living creature is it's by a domestic wild animal and by fowl. By kosher animals, a little bit main, but not by non-kosher. There, no matter what the state is, it's a non-kosher animal. Now, halacha beis, the Rambam further qualifies, says echad aver. Now, what's considered aver min chai? So whether it's a limb sheish bebasa gidim atzamis that has flesh and tendons and bones, kugan hayad varegel, like the foreleg and the hind leg, or echad aver shem ba'etzem, or whether it's a limb that doesn't have a bone, kugan haloshin, like the tongue, va'beitzim, and the testicles, va'tchayil, and the spleen, va'klois, and the kidneys, va'lev, and the heart, and things like that. Either one, it's considered a limb. Ella, but the difference is, if it's a limb that does not have bones, so there it's ben shachatach kule, whether it cuts off the whole thing, ben shachatach miktsasa, whether it cuts off part of it, that's prohibited because it's a limb from a living creature. But a limb that has a bone, you're not going to be liable for a limb from a living creature until you detach it as it is in its natural form, which is basa b'gidim atzamis. It has the flesh and it has the tendons and the bones. Because if you're going to separate from the living creature only the flesh, and again it has bones and tendons, then then the liability is actually going to be because of treifa, like we explained in Perek Halacha Yud, that treifa is a mortal defect. Obviously, if it's detached, it has a mortal defect, as we'll explain with the pasuk of a basa the treifa, it's detached, but one's not going to have the liability of a limb from a living creature. Halacha Gimel. So if someone eats from a living creature the size of an olive, so like it, as most isura achila is the share of a kezais. Now, even if he eats an entire limb, if there's a share of an olive, then he's liable. But pachas mekazai potter less than the kezai is going to be potter. Now, let's say you cut from a limb according to its natural state, which is bas begidmat samais, bones, tendons, and flesh. Kezayis, the size of an olive, and he eats it, so like he's going to get lashes. Even though the amount of meat, the flesh, is very little, because the bas begidmat samais are going to combine for the isra of Eber min Chai. But let's say you separate the limb after it was already detached from the living creature. And you start separating the flesh from the tendons, from the bones. Oh, then you're not going to get lashes. In other words, then you can't call it anymore Eber min Chai, because it's not the full limb. You detach the pieces, the components of it. Rather, it's considered what's called Basar min Chai, and because the bones and the tendons are not going to combine, so you're not going to be liable, you're not going to get lashes until you at least eat a full kezais of just the flesh itself. Because in this case, the bones and the tendons are not going to combine for the share of kezais. Since you change it from its natural form, the limb was created with the flesh and the bones and the tendons attached. Now that's separated, it does not have halacha as Eber min Chai, rather it's going to have halacha as basar min Chai. Halacha dal. Let's say he separated this limb, meaning he didn't separate the flesh from the bones and the tendons like in the previous halacha, but he separated this limb into smaller pieces. Now each piece does not have a share of a kezayas, so it also does not have halacha as Eber min Chai, rather as basar min Chai. So therefore, he eats it a little bit at a time. If at least what he has a share of a kezayas of basar, again, because it's not aver min Chai, has to have from the meat, then Chai loves not part is even the exam, because like we said, the bones and the tendons are not combining for the share of basar min Chai. But let's say, look, let's say you didn't cut up into such small pieces. The limb that you cut off was at least a shiva kezayis in its natural state. Bones, tendons, and flesh, and you ate it. Then so even though in his mouth he separates the pieces, the bones in his mouth before he swallows it, b'chayv is g'michayv because he took it in as a full aver because it had at least a share b'kezayis, and therefore they will combine for the share b'kezayis to get malchus. Halacha even minachai. Halacha hey, talish even minachai. Let's say someone detached a limb from a living creature, and the animal became a treifa by he taking off because you just detach a limb. The animal has a mortal defect now, and then he eats that limb. Chayiv shtaim, so he's liable for 2 isurim. One mishum even the chayiv because it's a limb from a living creature, or mishum treifa, and also because it's from an animal that's a treifa. Because that happened, as the Rambam says, because both prohibitions happened at the same time. It became a treifa and it was even the chayiv when you detach it. So if someone detaches the forbidden fats from an animal, he rips it out of the animal and he eats it. So like a shtaim, he's going to be liable for 2. One mishum eben the chai, because a limb from a living creature, which is what the fats are. It's part of the it's part of the organs. And because of forbidden fats. Now, although eben the chai only happens when he detaches the limb, and chaylev was forbidden from the moment the animal was born, still the eben the chai is going to take effect on the chaylev, because even the chai becomes forbidden also for Gentiles. And since it takes effect on the Gentiles, so it's also going to take effect on the Jews, even though it was already forbidden as chaylev, as we know the concept of Isser Meisiv, and therefore it's also going to be taking effect. Now, Tolash chaylev na treifa achalin, if someone detaches forbidden fats from a treifa and he eats it, so like a shal is going to get 3 sets of lashes, one's for the treifa, one's for the chaylev, and one's for the Isser of Evim and Achai. Halacha Vav. The Rambam continues regarding a hanging limb, and regarding if someone crushes or breaks the limbs. As Rambam says, Basa hameduldul babehema. If there's flesh that's hanging in an animal, it's cut off, but it's not detached. It's hanging from strips of flesh. The eva hameduldul ba, and you have a limb hanging from that flesh. So, if this limb cannot become reattached to the body and to heal. So although the limb was not fully detached until after the animal was slaughtered, Asur, it's rabbinically going to be forbidden. But since only rabbinic vein local, you're not going to get the biblical lashes. Now, because it was not detached, although it cannot heal. Now, the Mesa Behem, if the animal dies, so then we actually view as if it had fell off when it was still alive. Therefore, if someone would subsequently eat it, he would get the prohibition of eating a limb from a living creature. But if it could get reattached and regenerate, then the animal is slaughtered. It's going to be permitted because since it could become back connected and part of the animal, so the shchit is permitting it. It's like considered part of the animal itself. And if the animal dies, it's only be a problem about nevela and not because of evim nachai. Halacha zayin. Shaman aver. Let's say a limb becomes detached, but again, it wasn't cut off totally. It's pulled out. Or crushed, or ground. Could go in a beitim shemichai. So let's say like the testicles which are crushed. Nitkan, or again, if it was pulled out from the animal, but again, it wasn't fully detached, and the animal is slaughtered. Biblically, it's not forbidden. Because although you crushed it or you pulled it out from its socket, but it still has some life in it. That's why these limbs don't spoil, they don't deteriorate because they're still getting life from the animal. But still, says the Rambam, it's forbidden to eat them. From a custom that the Jewish people have had for years already before, because it's comparable to a limb from a living creature. So though it's not, but the custom is not to that it's forbidden to eat. Halacha ches, etzem shenishbar, a bone that broke. So if the flesh or the skin is chayfa roiv of yoy shel etzem anishbar, covers the majority of the thickness of the broken bone, and v'roiv hekef hashevet, the majority of the circumference of the break. So it's the majority is covered. Harizah says permitted. Now, but if the break pierces beyond the skin, so that limb is forbidden. Now, when you're going to slaughter the animal or the bird, you have to cut from the place of where it broke and throw that away. And the rest can be permitted. Now, let's say the bone broke. And the flesh is covering the majority. Now, but that flesh that's covering the majority is like eaten up, or like it's very thin. It's meager. Kabasa sharifa gorer, like the way he qualifies is like it's like meat that the doctor would usually scrape away, as a way of healing. Or even though the majority, but it's not a majority that's covering in one place, not contiguous, right? It's a little bit here, a little bit there, and if you combine it, then the majority of the circumference is going to be covered. Or even though it was covered with majority of it with flesh, but there's holes in that flesh, in that skin. Or that flesh has a hole in it. Or it's pierced like that of a ring. Or the flesh on top is scraped off. Actually, the flesh that's remaining on top of that break is like that of just like a peel, a thin peel. Or the flesh on the bottom, right on top of the bone that broke, is decomposed, and it was it disappears. And then the comes out that the flesh that is covering is like not even touching the bone, because the lower part of the dermis is just deteriorated. So says Rambam, in all these cases we rule that it's prohibited until the flesh heals. And then if it heals again, then it's covered by the majority, which we said permitted. And the if somebody eats from all these cases that we just described, we give him rabbinic lash. Again, it is ultimately covered, but again, it's inferior, and therefore we say that it's forbidden until the flesh heals. Halacha tes. Here the Rambam discusses already regarding the limbs of a fetus as it relates to the slaughtering of the mother. Halacha tes. If someone sticks his hand into the uterus of the stomach of the animal, not into the stomach of the animal, into the intestines, and he cuts off from the spleen and the clays, from the kidneys, or things that are similar to that, which are limbs that, if they're taken, it does not make the animal into a treifa. And they leave the pieces inside the stomach of the animal. And then the animal is slaughtered. So those limbs are forbidden as limbs from a living creature. Even though it's inside the animal, in its intestines, but ultimately it's cut off and it wasn't connected, so although it's still inside, it's forbidden. Now, but this is where the contrast is. But let's say it was cut off from here it is in the uterus, from the fetus that's inside the stomach. And they didn't take out what they cut off from the fetus. And the animal was slaughtered. So the pieces of the fetus or its limbs are permitted. Why? Because it never went out. And what's interesting about the fetus is it gets permitted with the mother slaughtering. So it's not part of the body of the mother. So it's not even a chai. It always was its own distinct entity. And since it was never removed, so therefore it's still permitted with the slaughtering of the mother. Now, if there's a fetus that sticks out his foreleg or its hind leg out of the uterus, out of the mother, that limb becomes forbidden forever. And that's whether you cut off that limb before the mother was slaughtered, whether you cut it off after the mother was slaughtered, it's going to be forbidden. Now, there is a difference between if it was cut off before the mother was slaughtered or after it, because if it was cut off before the mother was slaughtered, actually, as the Rambam is going to end off the halacha, it's forbidden because it's a treifa. If you cut off after the mother was slaughtered, it's actually forbidden because of even the chai, as Rambam is going to explain later on halacha yirah. But either way, it's going to be forbidden because, as Rambam is going to explain, once it sticks out its limb, it remains forbidden. And even if it takes the limb back into the uterus of the mother, and then the mother is slaughtered, let's say the child just ends up being born regularly, but lives many years. Once that limb went out of the mother's womb and with just that limb becomes forbidden as a treifa. Why? Because any flesh that goes out of its boundaries, which is the uterus, the fetus belongs in the uterus, not out, becomes forbidden like flesh that was detached from a living creature. Shneimah says in the pasuk of the treifa, the meat in the field, the way you can read the pasuk, is treifa, meaning since it goes out to a place that's like a field for it, meaning it's beyond its boundaries because it's supposed to be in the mother's womb. Now the treifa comes around like I already explained in Perek Dal halacha yud. Halacha yud, the Rambam continues. Let's say only part of the limb came out from the mother, meaning from the fetus. Some of it remains inside. So even if only a minority of the limb stayed inside the womb, the part that went out is forbidden. The part that remained inside is going to be permitted. Now, if they cut off from the part of the limb that went out, and they cut it off after it had brought it, meaning it pulled its hand or foot back in, and once it was already back in, then they cut off the part which again remains forbidden. They cut it off once it was already back in, and then subsequently the mother was slaughtered. So only that limb which had gone out, only that's forbidden. Like we said, and the rest of the limb that didn't go out is going to be permitted. But let's say it didn't pull its limb back in. And they cut it off when it was outside. The animal stuck on its foot, they're like, oh my, this part is forbidden, and they cut it off when it's outside. So whether they cut it off before the animal was slaughtered, or whether after the animal was slaughtered, the place of the cut, even that place is forbidden. And this is what's different than from the previous case. And this is the area that's opposite the ear space, because it's on the edge of the uterus. We don't call it an animal in an animal, which becomes permitted through the mother's shechita, because it's not inside, and therefore that place is also forbidden. Now, so therefore, after you cut off what had gone out, then this is clarifying what we just said, you then cut off the place of the incision itself, because that also became forbidden in the situation of when you cut it off when it's on the outside. Any limb of a fetus that, again, like we said, sticks it out of the uterus, and you cut it off before the mother was slaughtered, while it's still outside, that's considered a limb from a living creature, like we had previously explained, because the issa of basal basal treifa is only when you cut it off after the mother was slaughtered. But if you cut it before the mother was slaughtered, so that's even l'chai, and we get lashes. Now, and this is even if the fetus died before the mother was slaughtered, because a fetus inside, even if it's dead, it's considered like alive, because the mother's slaughtering permits it to be eaten. So therefore, it's like still like alive, and therefore it's going to be the issur of even l'chai. Now, but if it's cut off after the mother was slaughtered, then the one who eats is not going to get lashes, meaning for Evim Nachai, he will get lashes because of treifa, but he's not going to get lashes, even if it's dead, because the mother was slaughtered first, which did not permit it, and therefore it's not considered like it was from a chai, it's like from a mess. Now, if the animal dies and then you cut it off, then actually the one who eats it will get lashes for even the chai. And the reason that is because, well, why is dead different than shechita? It's because misa of the mother makes it like nipa, like as if it fell off. And you see it as if it fell off when they're still alive, and therefore it will be considered as it already fell off beforehand, as it was detached, as if it's aver min achai. Halachiyat base. If there's a fetus that sticks out a limb, Vanessa Eva, like we were saying, and the limb becomes forbidden. The akach no then is born. The harei he nekeva. Now it's a female. This fetus that was born. Hachalav shala asal l'shtoisim misafik. Its milk is forbidden to drink out of doubt. What's a doubt? Because the milk is coming through the limbs of the animal. And there's one limb that was stuck out when the animal wasn't born yet, which was forbidden, like a treifa. It's like treifa milk being mixed with kosher milk, because of that one limb, that all the limbs together are creating the blood which creates the milk, and therefore because of that, out of doubt, you're not allowed to drink the milk from this fetus. Halachiyat Gimel, the Rambam discusses regarding an intact fetus. If let's say someone slaughters a pregnant animal, and inside they find the fetus, whether it's live or dead, it's permitted to be eaten, again, because of the mother's slaughtering. And even the placenta that you find inside, which is the sac that the embryo is in, is also permitted to be eaten. Now, what's if, let's say, some of the placenta had gone out? And they slaughtered the animal. So, if the placenta was attached, it was tied onto the child. So, if so, that means the placenta is really part of the child which you found inside the animal. So, so what went out is forbidden, just like as part of the limb of the fetus goes out, it becomes asa. But the rest of the placenta that's inside is going to be permitted. But if let's say the placenta was not tied onto the child, then then all of the placenta is forbidden. Why? Maybe this placenta, that some of it had left, maybe actually the child that was originally inside the placenta was already out of this animal a long time ago. We never saw about it, miscarried a long time ago. And therefore it was never permitted with the mother's slaughtering, because it was not here. So therefore, its placenta, which is only permitted because of the dint of being part of the child, is also not going to be permitted. So therefore, the shili is not being permitted. Now, moreover, now, although you end up finding a child, it's just not connected to placenta, but this child that you find inside the bed, inside the stomach, maybe it's actually from a different placenta, and that placenta left, and therefore you only have the child. So therefore, the placenta is not going to be permitted with the slaughtering of the mother, since it's not tied onto the child. And if you don't find inside the stomach of the animal a child at all, then for sure the whole placenta is forbidden, because it's only permitted because of being part of the permissibility of the animal that's inside, which is a unique zeres that we permit that child, and the placenta is part of that. If there's no child, or that child is not necessarily part of this placenta is not going to be permitted. Let's say you find inside the cow or whatever animal that you just slaughtered, you find a live fetus. So although it's a full 9-month baby and it's about to be born, it's possible to live. You don't have to slaughter the animal. The mother slaughtering permits this to eat this animal, and you could eat it as is. Now, but if you've already put a foot on the ground, then you have to slaughter it, and that's rabbinic, because the Marasayan looks like you're just eating an animal without properly slaughtering it, although it already permitted with the mother slaughtering. Let's say cars the animal, let's say tear open an animal, or shachad beim, a treifa, or you slaughter an animal that's a treifa. So therefore, essentially, there's no shchita that's permitting shchita over here. And you find inside of it a living 9-month-old baby. You need to have a proper slaughtering to permit this fetus that's inside, because it wasn't permitted with the slaughtering of the mother, either because you tore open the mother, because it was a treifa, which is not a valid shchita. And because the slaughtering of the mother does not help for the fetus. Now, let's say it's not a full month; it's the middle of the pregnancy. So, although it's alive in the stomach of this treifa animal, although it's alive, it's going to be forbidden. Because it's not developed yet totally; it's still considered as a limb of his mother, which the mother was a treifa. Now, any fetus that sticks its head out of the womb and then pulls it back in, and then you slaughter the mother, the slaughtering of the mother is not going to be effective for the fetus, because once it's stuck on its head, it's like it was born, and therefore there you have to have a separate slaughtering on the fetus, which is this new child.